Okay, welcome back. We had there's a lot of construction going on at the State House, and as a result, we had to move. The State House is madly preparing for the legislature to return in January. So thank you for your patience. Any of you who are watching, one of you who was watching is actually here now. So anyway, we are, I think, moving off the executive summary, but Patrick, would you summarize what you understand from our conversation that we're wanting to clarify in the summary section?
Yeah, so my understanding is from your conversation, you feel that it would be good to have an opening statement that alludes to the fact that, especially given the housing pressures in the state, I think the term you used was urban financial pressures are bleeding into rural areas.
They are.
Affecting things like transportation, childcare, and access to a lot of those things. And for that reason, despite the fact that you're not updating the methodology for those particular sections, you would like sort of a close monitoring of them in conjunction with sort of demographic changes in the state. And from that, you also would like to recommend that this committee convene more than once every 15 years, I think, is right. Because in 2008 was the last one, and we're in 2023 now.
And we'd like to have it updated every 6 years, which we want to make sure it gets updated on the even year before the new biennium. So it has to be updated every 6 years, I think is the right number. So that it would be reviewed in the even year with a report ready for action and to be reviewed in the January of the beginning of the biennium, which is the odd year.
Yeah, so 6 years from now, the next technical committee would be 2029.
Yeah.
Right, it's on the odd year, not on the even year. Because that way, with it being on the odd year, right, it means that if we need a statute change or any other methodological change, it's then prepped. We have enough time to get ready for the even year to have the report actually done.
The work has to happen in the even year so that it is finished and ready to go for the odd year. Too complicated, but yes, that's exactly what we're looking at. So we're recommending it be reviewed every 6 years. Right? Okay, thank you.
And in the interim, there's the usual process we have for going through joint fiscal committee for.
So, and then the other change we'd like to make in the executive summary, and then we need to move on, is that, is that we're going to have a chart of the summary change, a summary of the chart, but a summary chart of the changes that are incorporated.
More detail than what's in there now.
Sorry, Rich.
I just say the underlined bit that, and I think Ellen and I talked a little bit about that, is that the reason we want the statement in the front is when you get down to putting together the budget and where we put our money in areas, I think it goes without saying that we all expect it now, but if you're doing a basic needs budget, you need to say it. Housing is one of the places where you have to make a priority, and here's what the priorities are, but it comes out of partly those changes.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So I think with those, though, if we can incorporate that statement and that chart, I think then we're good to go. Sean, anything else before we move on? I think we now need to get into the body of this because our time.
Yeah, jumping in is great. I just made the quick point, I think, where it was cut out, that it sounded like the important point was really the variance, if I understood what Senator Westman was saying, regarding the demographic shifts in demographics and work residential locations, that is really a significant variance, right? People that have to commute far and or live in the more expensive places are going to be higher. These numbers are going to be conservative for them, but there'll also be many people, because of that variance and bringing up the average, who are have much lower costs.
No one has much lower costs in Vermont. I'm sorry. It's just
you're working off average. I mean, if you're making the point
anymore.
If you're making the point that it's variance, right, and you're working off of median and average, by definition, people that are on the outliers on the high side are helping out the others in terms of working off the average. Now, I'm not saying low cost, that if you're comparing to past years or longitudinal comparisons, it's still going to be high. But if you're saying the numbers are conservative, but you're continuing to work off of these averages and medians and things that are driven by inflation, and you're making the point that the demographic and residential shift is hitting people that live or work in, say, Stowe or cities or the expensive areas. It just seemed to me that variance is the point we're making there, but maybe I misunderstood the point being made.
No, I think I think we just really want to acknowledge that inflation is driving
I think Patrick's got it.
I think you got it. I think Patrick's got it. I think we're ready to move on. We have an hour and a half. So I would boldly propose we skim by the enabling legislation, which is what it is, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing just to remember from that is that you have this sort of fail-safe in that bill where if for any reason, this wasn't able to come before JFC for approval, then it would still, be enacted into the next report. We would still incorporate that.
Right. And then we're going to flush out the component recommendations and changes in beginning in whatever page it is. But the section that begins component review and recommendations.
Do, on the draft on this page at the very end where it says section 2, 2025, is it 20, so we're doing this for 2025? I guess I'm.
Yes, that's the challenge.
Aren't we in 2023 right now?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
So next year at this time, these guys will be getting
so
a
sorry.
report.
They do their work in
Okay.
in the even year
What you guys
to
were talking
prepare
about.
for the
Gotcha.
beginning of the biennium,
Okay.
which is in an odd year. There we are.
So the dates are a little funny. So the 2024 report will be published by January 15th, 2025.
Gotcha.
That's just the due date for the
Yeah.
next report.
Okay.
It's okay.
So the first section here under assumptions is, I think, another point you all wanted to discuss a little bit further. So you did make sort of two concrete changes. One was to add single shared housing as a family configuration. And the second was because we're going to be incorporating the childcare subsidies, which will cause the 2 adults, 2 children, 2 wage earners budgets to not completely, but significantly converge with the 2 adults, 1 wage earner with 2 kids, just because it's really going to be knocking a lot off of their childcare budgets, which is the primary driver of the difference between the two. And so I think with that, one other thing I wanted to just let you all know, I had a conversation with the auditor yesterday, made the good point that, just pulling up the numbers, that in the analysis I did for you that showed how many households are cohabitating and how many are roommates, I was still including homeowners within that cohort. So after backing that down, remember the overall number was about 30,000 households.
Yeah.
2 adults, whether it's split between the two. But when we back out all the homeowners, we get down to about 10,000 households. And it does bring the proportion of roommate-only households up, but it brings it up to 26.2% of those households are roommates. So we still have about 74% that are married or cohabitating. So before it was about, there's the number, 83% were cohabitating. That's come down to 74. And then 17% were roommates. That's come up to about 26%. So there is still, it's about a 25-75 split. But I know that you still wanted to pursue discussing whether to make that change for the official livable wage from the two adults, where we're assuming that they're living together as partners, to roommates, where we have to make changes on the assumptions around taxes and housing, like how many bedrooms.
I believe that's the case. Isn't that what we wanted to do?
You hadn't made a decision whether you wanted to switch to the official livable wage being a reference to roommates.
I had put it out as a suggested change, but we hadn't made a final decision together.
I thought that was single shared housing.
So we have added
sharing
that.
housing.
We have added that as a new family configuration. However, you would still need to make the decision whether you wanted to shift the official livable wage to reference that household, because right now it references two people and we're assuming that they're married. So they'll both still be included in the report. It's just the distinction between the official and another reference point in the report. Because right now the
So at the
15.
moment, isn't it just for a single person?
No, for right now, it's a married household and you take half of what the budget is. So they'd both be needing to earn that amount.
And so what we're proposing is moving it to single shared housing as the official. And how do people feel about that? I'm fine with that. Yeah. Anybody else? Everybody else? Sean?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay. So, there was nothing else with regards to household configurations that I had heard from the discussions. However, moving into the,
Sorry, we're replacing one with another. So we're
Yes.
still at 6.
you're still at 6.
So there was some hope that we could reduce the number of configurations.
You'd have to identify one that you feel is redundant, I suppose.
Right, and how do people feel at the moment about the configurations that we have?
Let me just.
I think we had all agreed last time that we were fine, and Patrick said he was okay.
Yes, no, I realize, but is everyone okay with where we are? Okay, great.
Okay, so if we're okay there, moving into the urban and rural budgets, I outlined a lot of the discussion that I.
Yes, you did a nice job. You did a nice job, although I do think that inflation and particularly housing, the cost of housing and what's happened with our, the pressure of short-term rentals, I think until we resolve that it's going to continue to put terrible pressure on some of our rural housing, in addition to actually some of our urban housing. I think an expanded conversation there to reflect some of the pressures that exist would be helpful.
Sure. I can add another paragraph detailing that in a little.
Yeah, I mean,
Correctly.
and just detailing the impact of inflation on the entire.
Sure.
The entire budget. I just, yeah.
So this section does, summarize a lot of the discussion that you had, but there is towards the bottom, a specific recommendation that the committee seems to have agreed to, which was to, instead of averaging the urban and
Right.
rural livable wages and having that be the official, the new official, there basically would have two
Would have two
official livable wages, one specific to urban and one specific to rural. And the reason for that, which you all discussed, was that by averaging the two, you end up with a single number that neither directly reflects the urban costs and neither directly references the rural.
So at least now it will be more realistic. Perhaps not perfect, but more realistic, which is useful. And so it will be, the official recommendation will be for single shared housing and a single person in shared housing, right? And it will have an urban and a rural recommendation. So that's the picture we're looking at.
Okay, so if we are good there, we can move into the component reviews. The first of which, and I'm sorry again that there are not page numbers. That's my first edit I'll make.
Yes, but just do it by title. So the next one is under component review, under food.
Food. So you all went through the methodology for this where you're not recommending a change from the USDA
Right.
data source for this. However, you are recommending that we shift from that 10-year differential, which is how we adjust Northeast costs, that 10-year differential down to a 5-year. And the reason being is to capture more current day differential while still allowing for some smoothing over time to, help mitigate any sort of outlier issues there might be with the survey that we're relying on for that. And then the second change that you were recommending is that for households where there's only one adult, the current methodology was to use the USDA budget for a female. Whereas now for all those single adult households, we would be averaging those budgets between men and women. The effect of which, because the USDA budgets show men have a higher food budget, the effect of that would be to slightly increase food budgets.
Because men don't shop with a list. Nolan, you're the exception. And maybe Richie.
My wife always makes me a list.
And it's consistent with the others too. I was looking actually the driving numbers. I think in Vermont, it's 16,000 miles average for men and 10,000 for women. I think we're using the 13,000 there. So I think it makes sense to be consistent with.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Good point. Yeah.
So those were the two recommendations you all had around food. Albeit relatively minor tweaks, but they, I think that they do sort of refresh the methodology that's being used there.
Well, and make it more accurate.
Right.
I think, all our efforts are to make this a more accurate and therefore more useful document for everybody. I mean, for policy, for public-private sector, however it's applied.
I just have a quick thing that
Yeah.
that just occurred to me because we're doing things like including the childcare subsidy and the child tax credit. Does free school lunch for everyone have any effect on the food budget for the families?
It doesn't have an explicit budget. We don't have that factored in.
Also, there may be some tax implications because school costs may go up. So my guess is that's a wash.
Okay.
Okay.
So moving to housing, I know that there's been a lot more expansive discussion on this topic that hasn't been explicitly written into this one paragraph. I do think it'll be addressed in the opening statement and some of the other executive summary tweaks that have been requested. But I mean, big picture, I think that you all have a little trepidation with this data source, although it is still sort of the best one available to us, and it is official and regularly updated. Yeah.
Sadly, it would be great if we had one that we all had, yeah.
I think the last sentence here needs to get updated though, now that we've talked about having the added family configuration, household configuration.
Yep, I have a note right here that I just wrote down saying that we'll use the assumption that the single person shared housing will reflect the 2-bedroom rents from that data source. So that is something that I'll explicitly reference there.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But ultimately,
This housing did take up a huge percent of our conversation, which is you wouldn't get if you just necessarily. It's, yeah. Anyway, it's a huge, I think it would be great if we could add a sentence or two which said, the pressures on housing really drove a lot of our conversation and the costs of housing. And that, anyway,
Sure.
I just think it's it's adding a huge smoothing effect to that urban rural difference in ways that no one probably had expected.
Sure.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that some statement like that needs to be in there. I think it goes without saying that from this committee's point of view, that although it's not specifically, and Ellen, it's not in the, but you know, we continue to think it ought to be a focus of effort for the state.
Oh, it will continue to be a focus.
Yeah, but I just say, I don't think it would hurt for
Yeah.
this committee to say that.
Right. So I think an expansion on this to reflect that
Sure.
conversation needs to be,
Sure.
you know, we can work on that. But
I think for a technical, sorry, I just think for the technical document too, here, the inflation point, where we addressed on one of the pieces I'm forgetting now, where we tightened up the look back period for applying forward that the assumptions around inflation. It seems like that's really the role of this technical document for how we're looking at inflation and flagging it, right? And then the policy will go up. I agree, it's certainly huge. I was just looking at the fair market rents yesterday, and for FY24, you know, here in Washington County, they went up 16%. Which is much higher than other cities around. It's like, you know, it's much more in line with inflation if you look down in New Hampshire and Maine and other places. So it's a huge issue here. But I think
and Sean, that's a one year increase?
yeah,
Up
FY24 compared to FY23, 16%.
Wow.
In Washington County.
Wow. And
Can I recommend that maybe when we go through the component reviews and also the other ones, that the sentence where you say the committee recommends, that you bold that. I just think it'll pop out for the reader that is skimming this, just they can quickly go to like, oh, right, you changed that. Sure. Thanks. Transportation?
Transportation, there's a lot of words on the page for transportation that ultimately land up at the same spot. But I explained,
something where we're recommending that.
yeah, well, it was probably along with housing, one of the more robust,
Yes.
more time intensive conversations we had. But, you know, here I'm outlining some of the difficulties we have with the current survey that we use. Part of that had to do with the fact that it was not updated very regularly. I think it was on an 8-year schedule, which means that it got out of date pretty quickly. But also the fact that FHWA is now going to be updating this survey once every 2 years. So, you know, consistently going forward, we will have more up-to-date mileage data that we can use in this report. I explained that we looked at sort of the Cadillac plan, which would have required somewhere in the range of a $275,000 to $300,000 appropriation for the survey, for the more robust sample size for the survey, and that those results would not have been available until 2027. So in the interim, we would have had to write 2 reports without that more robust data. The third thing that was looked at was a shift to the CES, which is currently utilized by MIT. But ultimately, the reason that you all have decided to stay with the current methodology is you also opted to maintain the urban-rural distinction, if you remember, because the CES does not differentiate between urban and rural spending.
Right.
So for that reason, despite some of the sampling issues with the NHTS survey, and given that it was pretty out of date for this last report, we were using 2017 results. We opted to stay with for the reason that it is still Vermont specific, although we have to make some adjustments using national data. So it's still Vermont specific, and they're going to be updating it much more regularly going forward. And for that reason, you've opted to recommend not
Yeah.
changing.
No change, which, you're right. Justifying no change here takes up a lot of words.
Right.
But going forward, I can't remember, they're going to be updated every 2 years?
Every 2 years.
Yeah,
So we should actually have
which
a
gives us more
new
confidence.
set of results next year when we're writing the next version of this report.
Yeah, so it gives us the confidence to stay put.
And especially if you start holding this committee once every 6 years, you have the ability to look at this again and see if it still works for you.
Okay, great. Any transportation thoughts? You okay? Great, let's do Nolan's Health and Dental Care.
I would say all Vermonters, not just mine.
I know, but you're in the room.
Well, so ultimately, the committee is not recommending any changes here. We looked through Nolan's methodology. It's great. And I think if there's anything that he would like to expand on that, I'd invite it. But I think that we did spend about an hour plus on this topic, going through the methodology. It is one of the more analytically rigorous. It does require large data sets that need to go through, but I think that's a reason that you can view it as on a solid foundation. And that's why the committee did not recommend an update to
Also,
that.
the complexity of it was daunting.
It is fine.
And I have to say, in Taiwan, it was wonderful. I mean, they have a single payer system. But we were all agreeing with equity, no matter what you. Sounds like a great system in Taiwan. I wish we could.
They don't have the same shortage of dentists and doctors we do.
Nope. Although they do have some of the same workforce issues that we have. Anyway,
Yeah, so moving to childcare, I think the big question with this one was whether to include or not to include the childcare subsidies, and part of the conversation was whether that should be considered a public good or if it's considered public assistance, given the fact that it's goes pretty far up the income scale, and all of the family configurations in this report would qualify for it. For that reason, you all had decided to recommend incorporating the subsidies, but not changing the underlying methodology for this component.
and I would argue that it is a public good and it is publicly subsidized. So it's both. It is a public good that we have chosen to invest in. Wish we would do the same in other things, but this is one of the ones where we're uniting both public good and the public support.
And so sort of as a callback, the reason that you opted to drop the family configuration of 2 wage earners, 2 kids, but one wage earner, 2 adults, 1 wage earner, 2 kids, was because these subsidies are going to bring down the childcare costs quite a bit for the 2 adults who are wage earners, which should cause those 2 budgets to converge significantly, not completely, but significantly. So that was everything on childcare. The next section had to do with clothing and household expenses. We looked at this consumer expenditure survey tables that we're using. And we looked at the income groups, and there weren't any recommended changes there. But in the methodology, one thing that gets backed out is spending on miscellaneous household equipment. And within that consumer expenditure survey bucket includes spending on computers.
Right. It's now our essentials.
Which we discussed, and sort of a simple way of incorporating those costs would just be to go take the price of a basic laptop computer and amortize that cost over the course of 5 years. So that monthly cost would be, I think we had it.
Amortized at X amount per month.
Yeah, we would. Yeah, so we'd take the cost, divide it by 5, divide that again by 12, and that gives us our monthly costs, which I think in the presentation I gave, At 5 years, it was about $13 a month.
Including the cost to connect, the internet cost.
Well, that's within the telecommunications budget, so
But the hardware was not included, so we've now included the
the computer
hardware.
itself, right?
Right.
So that was the only change in that category, which was to add that laptop cost. Personal expenses was another pending item that we had found. So initially
So we have a decision point on this one.
yeah, so just to call back to our last meeting, the feeling amongst the group seemed to be that the existing budget for this is a bit too low. On a per day, it's $3.51 for adults and then half that for children. And so the number $5 was sort of $5 up from the existing $2. So it's $2 and we grow it by inflation every year. The idea was to sort of do a reset this year and then grow that number by inflation going forward. I think the one thing I would just say is that moving from $3.50 to $5 would be about a 45% increase over the existing methodology or the existing figure. So I don't know if the feeling was that $5 was
You were going to put some science behind that, as I recall. We had deferred to you to give us a little more.
yes.
We had deferred to you to bring back a little more science to it. And you're saying it will take it up 40%, but I would argue it's 40% unrealistic. I think that $5 a day or whatever you actually are coming back to us recommending is, because we're looking at it cumulatively for a week, let's say, $35 or whatever. That might be going to a movie. I mean, it might be personal expenses or a whole range of things. It could be coffee, it could be the newspaper on a daily basis, but as you add it up, it could be going to the movie, popcorn, parking, a very cheap meal. I mean, it's very modest if you look at that as a night out to pay with a family for something fun every once in a while. What are you guys thinking? So I think $5 is fine. And if
I thought we agreed, who was it? Was it Nolan? Or somebody said we should stick with, rather than just thinking in our hearts that $5 is a good number.
we actually went, I think we left it, leaving it to you guys to come back with more science on it.
Yeah, I think that's
Or maybe-
right.
I think that's where I feel we left it. And if you think $5, I mean, I just think $3.50 a day is just unrealistically low.
Yeah, so I did go and look at the tables that we used for, so the CES tables, which are used for a lot of our other categories. And, you really can't, I mean, in some small way, this figure that we have here is somewhat of a placeholder. It provides flexibility within your budget to account for, the small niceties that you like to have every once in a while. So
It's like a contingency.
Your kid goes to a birthday party.
Yes, exactly. I mean,
Or you need to take an extra trip on a bus.
yeah,
I mean, one extra trip on a bus almost covers
eat this all up. So it may be 40% higher than what we have currently, but I don't think that's a bad thing if it's looking at contingency and at a cumulative spend in a week or a month. What do you think?
I'm not afraid to put 40% higher in.
Yeah.
The only thing, I think Nolan did raise a good point. We need to have it tied to something else that gives it structure.
Or justifies it.
And justifies it. And
And that's, I think, what we had asked you guys to come back with, if you had anything. And it sounds like you don't really.
I don't have a strong recommendation on this. I have gone and looked at the tables that we use. And I just don't think that there's a strong justification from the CES to move it one way or the other, or to leave it really. So, I think that this is really more kind of as a not omission.
It's like a building in a contingency, it sounds like.
Exactly.
I would boldly propose that we put out $5 a day as a contingency and gives families a little bit of wiggle room and the budget, the livable wage budget a little bit, a tiny bit of wiggle room.
I think we had also suggested moving the child one up to $250 a day.
Yeah.
So the existing is that the child number is just half of what we use for the adults, so
Right.
it would shift in.
Yeah.
Sort of.
But
And that
I,
puts it at like $450 a month for a family of four,
yeah, so,
for just stuff.
yeah, and that's everything from birthday presents to something that goes wrong to a coffee and a muffin in the morning. I mean,
Well, there is the savings component that should cover emergency situations. That's what that's meant for.
the savings is so low. We want people saving for retirement. I mean, I think you want savings to not be, and I think this gives you some wiggle room in your budget too, so something modest gives you you have it.
The only other place I can think of that we do a component that is, personal needs is for people in nursing homes. That comes out to someplace in the 240, 250 range. But I can't think of any place else that there's any comparison in. Do you know one?
Not from the head, no.
So I put on the table $5 and $250 for kids.
Yes.
How do people feel? Sean, you have something you want to add?
And throw in, I mean, if I still don't.
Sorry, I couldn't understand you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna say, I still don't love the idea of it being arbitrary. If we're seeing the savings is supposed to be kind of covering emergencies, but we're acknowledging that the savings percentage is too low, would it be more appropriate to fold this into the savings, but increase the savings percentage to something that we see more reasonable? It would seem like moving forward, that would be something I think we could put forth in a technical document as we changed the savings percentage from X to Y based on these reasons. And it would feel more grounded to me than choosing an arbitrary number.
I think that the issue is that we just need to be really careful about the kind of examples we come up with. I think saving, like emergencies doesn't fall there. Emergencies is meant to go in tax in the savings part. And, coffee, you could argue should be in your food line item, right? Like, let's just be really clear and precise about what we're saying falls into the category of personal expenses. And I think miscellaneous, those unexpected things, without saying what that is, or a newspaper or a gift, your kid's got to go, or you need to go to a movie, or just something where you have the ability to have some level of normalcy that most households we would expect to have would fall under personal expenses, and just not get into too much detail about what that is.
I think that's fair.
I would just say I agree with Sean in terms of feeling like this whole document is grounded in research, and for us to just sort of arbitrarily say, well, we think it should be raised up, which there could be a point to that, meaning that we just want to be more generous, but that we should probably make that clear, right? Not just come up with a number of $5 and say, to say that like the committee thought that even though we've used the CPI in the past, that this is a more comfortable level for a Vermont family.
Well, we're leveraging our own lived experience in terms of personal expenses.
I mean, it is the case that when the committee in 1999, this was not part of the original budget methodology when the Peace and Justice Center did it. So it was the 1999 committee did the same thing. They didn't have a justification for it. They just said, we think this is reasonable, right? So I totally agree with what you guys are saying, that whenever possible, but in this particular case, especially given how small it is, I think the question is, does it pass the straight face test? Do you think anybody would who sees this would be like, quibble with it in a way that would be detrimental to them then not wanting to use the whole report.
No, I can't imagine anybody doing that. So I would maintain that we, realistically, I'm employing my own sort of lived experience as I figure how one uses cash and how one uses a personal expense on a monthly basis.
Although, to be fair, you're not somebody making $16 an hour, so.
I'm earning less than that, my dear, as a legislator. I just want to remind everybody here, we are. And if you're trying to keep within that budget, I mean, that is tough to limit all your
It is.
additional expenses
Yep.
to $5 a day.
So, well, I mean, I guess the question to, I forget who, what would fall under the definition of personal need? We're talking shampoo, toothpaste, like if you come up with like a basic,
I think we have a list of the things that we looked at.
The personal care products is being added, and that would include some of that because it hadn't been included.
so the question becomes, what would fall under that isn't captured elsewhere?
Anything that comes up. I mean,
It's like if you want to buy a book or get a coffee.
well, coffee, movie, dinner out. Anything that isn't strictly
Entertainment,
yeah.
is that all in here? Personal expenses? We don't have an
No, it's entertainment is a piece of it.
I mean, it kind of gets back to the question of this is a basic needs budget, right? And we're calculating sort of the things that you need to have, right? And it's, I guess that's sort of.
A break. Everybody needs a break and needs some mad money.
Is this gonna change the hourly rate?
I mean, there's several accumulative changes that are going to affect the rate. You're going to have some upward pressures and some downward pressures. So childcare, for example, is going to have a downward pressure. The changes that you're making to food are going to have an upward pressure.
Housing is going to have an upward pressure. I mean, there are a lot of things that are going to have
We're not changing the methodology for it.
Right, exactly. But I would argue that this is an area where there has been upward pressure. I mean, I don't know.
I guess I might caution again, like, unless it's, like, we're just saying, oh, well, it's a break, like, I feel like it needs to have a little bit more substance, like, what falls into that?
Well, we asked you for that. We asked you to come back to us with how we could justify this. And it sounds like you can't.
I don't have a good justification, one way or the other.
So given that you can't justify it, I think lived experience around this table would tell us that $371 a day is low.
I don't know, I don't carry cash and I don't buy things.
I think,
I definitely don't spend that, but it's okay.
I think,
You don't buy flowers for somebody if you're going to the hospital because somebody's sick. I mean, you do stuff on a
Yeah.
daily basis. You make choices that are unexpected, that don't fit into other categories because life happens. And you either have to go to the hospital and you have to bring something, or you have to go to a birthday party, you have to bring a present. Kids feel terrible if they aren't on the same playing level. I mean, I think there is justification. I don't think all those things neatly fit into other slots.
I guess in my head, it goes to, what is the underlying purpose of the dollar amount? Is it the amount that people need or the amount that people should have?
It's the amount of people, I think it goes to why they started to include it. Why did they start to include this category, Ellen?
I
You
mean,
just said it. I mean,
they just thought that there are things that just don't fall in the other categories,
Right.
and a very
Catch-all.
modest amount should go in there. I mean, just as a reference, if you, for a single person, $5 a day times 365 divided by 2080 is 7 cents an hour wage
yeah, it's
differential.
nothing.
Now, it would be more if you have a 4-person household, 2 adults, 2 kids, that would be $15 a day times 365 is I'm sorry, what?
You said 7 cents, wouldn't it be 28 cents?
Yeah, times that 4.
Yeah.
Well, the children are half, right? Or did you say
So it's
two
even less.
It's even less, yeah.
It's, yeah,
times 3?
$15 a day.
Right.
10.
It's 14
So,
and
so that's what, I mean, that's what we're, the range that we're talking about.
Yeah.
so it's to enable unanticipated expenses that you may
Don't
need
fall
or
into the
may
other-
want.
Or they don't fall into other categories. Don't fall in the other
That don't
categories.
fall into the other categories.
Is there any reason that we couldn't, is there some statutory reason why we couldn't change it to just say miscellaneous expenses? Because when I see personal expenses, I'm sort of thinking like coffee, right? Not birthday gifts, not movies, not like random,
Flowers at the hospital.
Yeah, that kind
or
of thing.
Things that you need to spend money on that you
Right.
haven't anticipated. Unanticipated miscellaneous expenses is what I would call this.
Yeah, I mean, there are several components which are called out in statute that have to be included, but as you saw, maybe in the very first meeting that we had, there are several expenses in here that are not required in statute, but we do still include. This is one of them. So if you wanted to rename it, you're certainly free to do so.
Liz, thank you for bringing that up. It might actually be useful to change it to something like miscellaneous expenses because we are adding the new component of personal care products. So what's the difference between personal expenses versus personal care products? That could trip people up.
Product is different.
That could trip people up, just
Yeah.
like their initial hit of it, you know?
So I would boldly propose that we change this to miscellaneous expenses. And that also then justifies it as a contingency amount, which is what we had talked about before. Let's talk about it as miscellaneous expenses. And then I think that then that does build in a very modest contingency in the budget.
Then I sort of feel more comfortable with that sort of, not arbitrary, but like our belief that $5 is more realistic, right?
I think that's fair. Sean, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm not gonna stop it. I mean, I agree with what the points that Nolan and others have said, and I like the longitudinal comparison and consistency, but I think for the small amount, I don't think you need to spend more time on it.
Okay, great. Let's move ahead. $5.
I like this because I'm reading the definition these CPAs use in businesses, and they say it's cost incurred by a business or individual that does not fit neatly into other categories of expenses. They're usually small, infrequent, or irregular.
Right. So that's under what would be called miscellaneous.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think that sort of gets to the essence of what you're doing, where you're going.
I agree.
Thank you.
Let's incorporate that into our description of what this is meant to be.
I'll have no one send that to me.
Okay,
Thank you, Nolan.
I mean, doesn't help you get a number, but it helps you justify the new.
No, and then it wasn't, yeah, I think this is good. So let's reset. I think it needs to be reset.
Okay.
Reset and renamed. Well done.
So we have a couple more things to get through. I think that was our last decision point of the day. So I'll just review what some of the other changes you made were. The first one, or the next one, is telecommunications. We talked about how we currently use a blended average that includes, we use the CDC, this survey of what people use at home. But now we want to consider only cell phone usage when we do this. So we won't be using the blended average moving forward based on your recommendation. We'll just be applying the budgets for cell phones.
Right, which is slightly higher.
It is higher.
And that's, yeah. Even though we appreciate that many Vermonters still keep a landline for safety reasons.
Right.
Although I'm not sure you say that.
I mean, we could add that
No.
if you like. You looked at rental insurance, term life insurance, and savings. That was in the memo that we discussed. So we don't have any changes there that you're recommending.
Other than, sadly, all savings should be increased. I mean, we all save too little. And people in this category financial category do save too little, and we hope that this, coupled with our Vermont Saves program, will actually lead people to, we would hope, I mean, I don't know. if
They
we can-
can't save because they're not earning enough.
I
given the
know,
costs.
exactly.
Right, but that's not a choice, right?
But it's a choice if you're, there is a choice involved in signing up for Vermont Saves, which we might also encourage. You don't think that's appropriate?
I mean, that is a program policy decided program that is an opportunity for people to take advantage of, but it's not really directly related to the methodology.
That's okay. Anybody have any thoughts on this?
I mean, I think people know they need to save more, and we don't want to scare people away, right? Like, oh, you have to make $1 million in order to live to Vermont. Save 10% for retirement. I mean,
Yeah, I think some of the original methodology components of what went into the thought process around savings was your car breaks down. You know, you need.
Well, most
you
people
need-
don't have the $1,000 saved to pay for the change.
Right,
for that.
but that would be the reason for the recommended change of saving for retirement. Like, those were the kinds of things that people named as falling into that
And
category.
what I'm saying is, given the, it's sort of insidious, because then, of course, then in this earning category, they haven't saved enough for retirement, and therefore that's subsidized also. So it would be, I don't know how we encourage and enable savings more fully at this point.
I hate to be a broken record, but when you get reports that in Washington County, rent
Only up
goes up 16% in a year, how is anybody going to save? At least if you're
right.
somebody that's in a mortgage for a house. It's usually a 20 or 25-year mortgage, it's usually set. You know?
We hope.
Yeah, but more than likely it's set, and within that, a component of it is principal. And when you get to the end of your life, you can do a reverse mortgage and you have equity. You know, for a renter, which is 30% of our population, if rents keep going up double digits, I don't know what they do.
Right, yeah.
I would just comment that maybe not for this iteration, but maybe in 5 years, maybe, or whoever meets again. I think that it could be worthwhile looking at the savings piece because of just the changes that are made to Social Security and the ages that people can now take for Social Security, because we're still sort of in a flux where some people can take it earlier, but eventually there's going to be a whole host of us, most of us that haven't taken it, won't be able to take it till 67 or higher. And by then we may also know that our benefits could potentially be lower than what we anticipated. And therefore, we may want to think about increasing the savings amount to make up for the loss of what we're not going to get in Social Security. I don't know if you ever looked at Social Security in this, if that was ever a piece in
So
this.
the target demographic for this report for adults is 20 to 50-year-olds. That's who in a sense we're writing the report for.
But what they earn now
But they
has
still need to
direct
save.
impact on Social Security. So that's where they're tied.
Right, and then they still need to save during that time frame to be able to live when they're 67 and older with Social Security and whatever else.
To supplement their
To
social
supplement
security.
their Social Security. That may be going further in, but I think it's somewhat of a crisis. People not saving enough.
That's why I raise it. I think it is a crisis. And the treasurer has, we've put in place Vermont Saves, which was designed in large measure to get this financial population saving.
Right.
So, anyway, I don't know what we want to do about it for this
You wanna
report.
just add one sentence that just calls attention to the fact that this is a new program and you're pleased that it now exists because we recognized that the savings amount was insufficient for what
I
we
like
did.
that. It ties it to something that.
That would be
we're doing,
great.
An initiative that I think is important.
So I think that's great. Thank you. Thank you for taking. Okay.
And the
let's see.
reality is that the low income people, it's not as bad for low income people because they're used to living with low income. So when they have social security, they're able to manage it. It's the sort of, I mean, that's a true statement. Social security was meant to be sort of for lower income people to help them. And then, so when you have this middle class, so to speak, if they're making this and they're not saving, they're going to have a lot of trouble when they're older. They're not going to be able to live without making sure that they have enough savings because their social security isn't going to offset it.
Social security is.
I mean, it's not, it wasn't meant to be people's retirement, but more and more people are relying on it as a part of their retirement. And we should educate people that they really shouldn't rely on it because if you're making this kind of money, you know, whatever, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, you're going to need to save because social security isn't even come close to that.
Yeah.
That's my spiel.
Okay, so we can add a sentence about that.
Vermont saves.
So the last existing component was taxes. You're not recommending any changes to that area at this time. What I did include, though, that I would like you to confirm that I'm expressing your thoughts correctly, was with the inclusion of the tax credits. Because that they're received as a lump sum when the filer pays their taxes, you do have some concerns about sort of the month-to-month liquidity. You're ultimately not making any adjustments to the existing methodology here, but you just have expressed some concerns from what I've heard related to that.
I think that's fair. I would like us not to use the word tax burden. I mean, for those of us, I don't think taxes are a burden, they're a responsibility. And I think that's a pejorative
Sure.
use. Increased taxes you can talk about, but I wouldn't use the word burden.
Yep.
I'm channeling Dave Sharp here. Dave. We're doing a call out to former Representative David Sharp.
Okay, so if that is the one change there, the last component is just the inclusion of the personal care products. What we'll do is there is a personal care products and services line item in the consumer expenditure survey. What we will do is back out the services. So it's just reflecting, the physical products that you need, toothpaste, shampoo, things like that. And we will maintain consistency with the clothing and
So
household
why did we
expenses.
pull out services? I mean, because did we decide that personal services, like, let's say your body requires that you have physical therapy?
That would be under.
That would be under medical?
That'd be under healthcare.
That would be all under healthcare. Okay, so any service we thought that, okay. I couldn't remember that conversation.
Getting your nails done.
That is hardly a necessity.
Exactly.
So that's why we'd be removing it from the
That was my.
budgets.
Got it. Okay.
But yeah, to keep it consistent with other categories like clothing and household expenses, we'll use the same tables that we use for those expenses and target the same income buckets
And that
for the family
Rise
configurations.
of the income bucket.
Pull that up real quick, but it's basically what we do. It's not perfect in every case, just because the budgets move up and down. But they have ranges usually about $10,000 to $25,000 in range. And so when we see, okay, we're calculating this household is in within this, like, this is what their budget is.
Right.
We just go to the table and
Got it.
pick the income range.
That's good. Yep. So it fluctuates. So somebody that's making $18 an hour, $36,000 a year, that personal care products would be within that range that falls. Right. Got it.
So that brings us to the end of the component review. What comes next, we can just touch on briefly, but in Appendix A, I have all of the agendas and topics that were talked about listed, including all of the witnesses that you heard from. Further down in Appendix B, I don't know if this is necessary, but I included the statutory language for the basic needs budget report. So this could be useful to have in there just as when you reference anything statutory within the report, they have this as a resource towards the bottom to just cross-reference with. And so with that, that brings us to the end of the report. So I think next what might be good is why don't I just quickly run through all of the changes that you've just requested.
Well, before we do that, I just want to ask a question. So we talk about this as the basic needs budget, but we also talk about it as a livable wage document. Why do we use both these terms? Why do we not use one or the other? I guess I'm a little puzzled by that.
So, sorry, finish your thought.
That's my thought. My thought is, why have a double title?
Well, they are essentially two separate things. The budget is
What it
the
costs
spending.
and what you need to earn. So we call it, we call it the basic needs budget and the livable wage. Is that right? So it's the and that is, okay. So they are viewed, that's why we use this, okay. Okay, that helped, sorry. Yeah, I just needed to,
Yeah,
I was thinking.
sure. So would you like me to just run
Yeah.
through? Okay.
Yeah, let's go through all the
So
changes.
the first thing is page numbers.
Yes.
The second thing is we're gonna add the opening statement, referencing the inflationary housing and transportation challenges. And we,
I mean, it really was in some ways the challenge we faced that we had to deal with. And that justified all the changes that we've made. I think
And
that's,
justified moving to a shorter term. too.
yeah, absolutely.
we are going to add a sentence or two in the executive summary expressing the hope that this would be used more widely in the private and public sector.
Yeah.
We are going to add a table summarizing all of the changes so that, you know, that's all quickly and readily available in the executive summary. In that opening statement, I think we'll talk about sort of the variance and the pressures. Those were some
Yeah.
two of the words that I heard the committee discuss. And with that, the recommendation that you have a similar committee as this once every 6 years, rather than letting it go 15 years without having a formal review of what's going on. You can't make any changes to the enabling legislation. You are going to be adding, so I'm only doing new changes, not changes we've already talked about. We're going to shift the official family size or family configuration to single shared housing. And with that, as the assumption of a 2-bedroom rental and whatever tax implications there are. And we'll be under the urban and rural section, we'll be adding references to the pressures of housing and regionally, how those inflationary pressures are affecting the different areas. You did not request any difference in food. Under housing, we'll add a sentence or two again about the pressures of housing, and specifically note that we'll be assuming a 2-bedroom household or 2-bedroom household for that single shared housing. We're going to be bolding all of the sentences that
Holding that said, anything that says committee recommends
committee recommends exactly. There
or
were
does not. Or does not.
right.
All of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
There were no changes requested for healthcare, childcare, or clothing and household expenses. For personal expenses, we're gonna shift, I believe you landed to on $5 and $2.50,
Yep, we're renaming.
and we're calling it miscellaneous expenses. Under rental, term life insurance and savings, I'm going to add a sentence
About
noting
saves.
the Vermont Saves program and that you view it as a positive tool.
Well, and we would encourage people to use it and enroll in it.
For taxes, under that section, I'm going to not use the word burden. We'll find a different way of phrasing that. And then you did not have any recommended changes to personal care products or Appendix A or B. So does that capture all of the changes you all? Yes.
I'm sorry, I was looking through something else, but did you say, did you mention changing the title of personal expenses to unanticipated miscellaneous expenses?
I mentioned miscellaneous expenses. Because they're not, I don't know if I'd call it.
Miscellaneous is fine.
Yeah.
That assumes unanticipated.
So Madam Chair, if you're open to it, I would move that we
Right, you just do it.
would move to accept
Accept.
this report with the contingency of the final review based on the changes that we've made today.
Richard? You okay with,
Oh, you haven't got to the vote yet.
well, this is true, but this is down discussion. John? You okay?
Need a second.
Okay, I'll second it. We need a seconder. I'm happy to second. How do people feel about that? I am fine with it.
Miss anything?
Anybody else? Does this mean you're all okay with Ellen's motion?
Yes.
Sean, you're okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay. Yep.
Great. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. All those opposed? There is no one else, and so that motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Patrick, Emily, and Ellen for your good work on this. We look forward to seeing the incorporated changes. And if we feel we need further discussion, I am happy to set up a time when we could meet by Zoom just to discuss those. If anyone for any reason is not comfortable with what the final result is, I think we should be able to have a Zoom meeting and discuss it.
Well, do we actually need to go ahead and have even a 15-minute Zoom once we get the final
No,
draft?
because you just made a motion that we can accept this
As long as, but how do we get to know that everything has been incorporated?
I will be sending you, I will send it to all of you. It will still have the draft labeling on it when I send it to all of you. I think mechanically what could then happen is if someone feels that something has not been incorporated, you could then request that you have this follow-up.
We can easily arrange to have a follow-up Zoom meeting.
And
But I think that if we're all okay, if you would put in the email, Patrick, please respond to me within a couple days or by the end of the week.
Sure.
It would be nice to have a vote, a yes, a sign off on the final documents.
Awesome.
Okay, so
Great.
give us a time frame and give us a sign off, which is,
Sure.
please respond, all yes or no.
sure,
Okay,
absolutely.
that would be great.
Thank you very much.
I think we
everybody.
have done good work. Thank you,
Yeah.
team.
I think
It's been fun.
Well done. And we're done 32 minutes ahead of time,
And I would just like to,
despite all the challenges. Hey, Sorsha, thank you so much for your
Yeah, thank you, Saoirse.
patience with us. And Nolan, Emily, and Patrick, we really take our hats off to you. Well done.
and I just would like to say that I really appreciate how everybody asked really thoughtful and good questions. You dug in, really studied this. I think this was a great like the constellation of people on this committee, like you all added so much and I think it was just really a rich conversation the whole way through. So, and it was clearly sorely needed and overdue. And I really think this, even though we didn't have a lot of external witnesses and stuff like that, I think we got at the really critical stuff that we needed to talk about. So, and I did yesterday happen to see Roxanne Vogt from Vermont Business Social Responsibility, who you had reached out to about testifying, and she's just been has had so much on her plate. But she said, what would be helpful? And I said, honestly, what would be helpful is any recommendations that you have for the visual form of the report in a year and a half from now, so that her members could find it more useful to actually use.
I think that's our biggest challenge is how can we encourage this to be better used?
I personally, as someone who works in HR, knowing that in our recommendations, there's going to be verbiage about, let's revisit this in 6 years. Because if someone came to me and said, hey, I want you to use this report that, methodology hasn't been touched in 15 years, I'd probably say, oh yeah, okay, and just completely disregard that conversation, especially when it comes to wages and what somebody needs to be making now in 2023. So I think with the understanding that it's going to be revisited and that recommendation is in there, I think will really help businesses, small businesses, large businesses in Vermont.
So, I think we need to figure out a way to do exactly that, and having two members of that association, of the HR association in this team is really helpful.
But I was actually also thinking about just the physical, the layout of the report normally starts with the changes from the last report, and then it's several pages in before you get to the
recommendations.
The actual numbers. And I think if we started with the numbers and then say, here's what the changes were, and then you dig in, think about it from a reader's perspective, what you want them to use this.
How to make it more user-friendly in that regard.
But things like that, I think, Roxanne may send you some stuff. Doesn't require voting on. It's just some helpful suggestions.
We have some creative license over our formatting.
I think that's great. But yes, if the methodology is reviewed every 6 years, and of course it's updated every 2 years. So actually, it's only ever the numbers. Hopefully, if the methodology is in pretty good shape, the numbers are updated every 2 years. So that should hopefully be a document that's useful for more of us, and certainly, yeah. So having your confidence and pleasure in this work gives me great happiness, because you, as the creator of this and the visionary behind the basic needs budget, that you're happy and think we've done a good job makes me happy.
I think it's
Because you are the visionary in the room. So thank you so much. Well done, committee. You're a good team. What's our next task?
Adjourn.
Halloween. Happy Halloween. I think we're done. Thank you all. I move that we adjourn.